City of London, Vincent Keaveny, Mario Marcel, Governor of the Central Bank, Luis de Sousa, Her Majesty's Ambassador to Chile, David Gallagher, Ambassador of Chile to the UK, Jesse Norman, MP for Hereford and South Herefordshire, Senator of the Republic of Chile, Ricardo Lagos Weber, Deputy of the Republic of Chile, Mr. Pablo Prieto, Deputy of the Republic of Chile, Alejandro Santana, Alison Gauman, Alderman and Sheriff, City of London, Francisco Larraín, Capital Markets Coordinator, Ministry of Finance, Jean-Marc Mercier, Managing Director and Vice Chairman, Capital Markets, HSBC, Pierre-Julien Loriquet, Head of Global Banking, HSBC Bank. Dear friends, on behalf of the Board of InBest and the Ministry of Finance of Chile, we are very happy to welcome you to the 17th version of ChileDay and the 10th anniversary of ChileDay London, which will be held on a hybrid format today and tomorrow. I would particularly like to thank the Minister of Finance of Chile, Rodrigo Cerda, and his team. Minister Cerda will be with us remotely and will not be able to join us in person today because he's leading a very critical legislative agenda in Chile this week. We would also like to thank the Chilean Ambassador to the UK, David Gallagher, and his team, Pro-Chile, and the UK Ambassador to Chile, Luis de Sousa, and her team for the invaluable support in putting together a very full agenda. I would also like to especially thank Mario Marcel, recently reappointed as Governor of the Central Bank of Chile, for being with us today. We want to highlight in a very special way the support and commitment of HSBC, our main sponsor over the years, and especially to Monica Dube and her team. Thanks to our sponsors for relying once again on InBest and for its vital contribution to make this ChileDay possible. A gathering of great relevance, especially at a time when Chile needs to deepen its commitment of openness to the world in order to ensure a vigorous economic recovery after the pandemic. We thank AES Andes, Amundi, BCI, Compass Group, Caja Los Andes, Credit Corp Capital, Drake Group, Frontal Trust, JP Morgan Asset Management, Moneda Asset Management, Picton, Provida FP, Schroders, and Southern Cross Group. For the first time in our 10-year history, ChileDay London will be done in a hybrid format. Some of us are here in this beautiful building, and most of our agenda will be broadcasted through InBest.cl, bringing the content of this ChileDay to the entire local and international financial community. These last couple of years have certainly been very special, challenging for the world and for Chile in particular. The contingency that we're facing today due to the dire consequences of the COVID pandemic, coupled with the election and constitutional process that Chile is currently facing, require a concerted effort by the public and private sectors to work together in the extremely challenging post-COVID economic scenario. We need to come up with creative solutions that will encourage growth, job creation, and support entrepreneurship to build a Chile that offers greater opportunities for all. In this context, it is critical to have a diverse, open, and competitive capital market. We also need to engage with global investors and financial institutions, and ChileDay provides a great opportunity to do just that. During these 2 days, we have a very interesting agenda covering topics in which we can exchange views and learn from the UK and London, one of the world's leading financial centers in the areas of green finance, innovative energy solutions like green hydrogen, and financial technology. We will also have panels covering entrepreneurship. We will meet with Chilean entrepreneurs in London and UK entrepreneurs. We'll have a very interesting conversation between Michael Stott, editor for Latin America of the Financial Times, and the advisors to the two presidential candidates in the runoff to the Chilean presidential election. So I would like to thank everyone again and welcome Mr. Lord Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And buenos dias and good morning, everyone, and a particularly warm welcome to London, particularly those who have travelled from Chile for this occasion. even if the London weather is perhaps not as pleasant as it is in Chile at this time of the year. I'm Alderman Vincent Keaveny, the 693rd Lord Mayor of the City of London. We are particularly pleased to be hosting you here in Mansion House, hosting ChileDay again in Mansion House. It's wonderful to actually have you back in person here. I know that the event was not possible last year, so it's great that we're able to have albeit a hybrid event, that we're able to get everybody back in the room again and exploring those in-person connections, the vibrancy that one gets in a in-person event, and indeed the opportunity to do things such as exploring a shared Irish roots with Ambassador Gallagher, the sort of thing that would never happen online. It's, of course, the 10th year of ChileDay in London, and I'd like to particularly congratulate you all, especially the organisers, InBest, for reaching this milestone. As the historians amongst you will know, the UK's strong relationship with Chile goes right back to the foundation of the nation. And there is a wealth of bilateral trade and investment opportunities between the UK and Chile, with close to £2 billion worth of bilateral trade just last year. The Santiago office of the Department of International Trade has helped 29 Chilean companies to open or expand their operations in the UK, mainly in the tech and financial services sector, which is, of course, right to the heart of what we do here in the City of London. Chile was the first country with which the UK signed a trade agreement after we left the EU. Again, a milestone. And of course, the economic relationship could soon become even stronger, given our application here in the UK to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I welcome the commitment by both countries at the recent UK-Chile trade dialogue here in London to remove more non-tariff barriers and to expand the use of digital certificates to make trade even easier. The City of London has been fortunate to engage frequently with our Chilean counterparties on a number of issues, whether it be our mutual interest in fintech and innovation, as has just been mentioned, or the importance of sustainable finance, a particularly important theme in this post-COP period. My predecessor as Lord Mayor carried out a virtual visit to Chile earlier this year with a particular focus on sustainable finance, an area where we have a common shared interest due to our respective presidencies of COP. Another one of my predecessors as Lord Mayor visited Santiago in 2018, and I hope that a Lord Mayor will be able to return to an in-person visit soon, and maybe that Lord Mayor might be me. Let's hope that the current situation continues, stability returns into 2022. I'm about to visit Spain and Portugal late this week. I'm flying to Madrid tonight. So I am certainly personally keen to get international visits by the Lord Mayor back as part of the programme over the coming year. Since that time, of course, since the visit in 2018, there's been a significant uptick in green finance activities across the public, the private sector, the regulatory sector, which I commend, and not only commend, but I think which we all here recognise as being absolutely essential to meet the climate change challenge. I'm very pleased to see innovation and sustainability still in the limelight at this conference. Two really important areas, but also huge areas of potential for both Chile and the UK. So there's a great deal to talk about, a great deal to explore, lots of opportunities to consider. That's what ChileDay is all about. It's wonderful, again, to have you back here in Mansion House. Thank you all, and I hope the conference is a great success over the next couple of days. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am Nicolás Poblete. I'm the director of ProChile's office in the UK. First of all, I would like to thank you, all of you, for joining us today, especially to the Lord Mayor, Vincent Keaveny, for his words today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce the opening remarks from the Minister of Finance from Chile, Mr. Rodrigo Cerda. Unfortunately, he won't be able to join us in London at this ChileDay edition but he's following us very closely from Chile. Let's hear the minister's words.
Good morning, colleagues, and to all of you present today at this ChileDay 2021. Dear Lord Mayor of the City of London, Vincent Keaveny, dear Ambassador of Chile to the UK, David Gallagher, dear Minister of State at the Department of International Trade, Ms. Penny Mordaunt, dear MP for Hereford and South Herefordshire, Jesse Norman, dear Chair of the Central Bank of Chile, Marcel, dear Managing Director and Vice Chairman on Capital Market, HSBC, Jean-Marc Mercier, dear Jaime de la Barra, Chair of InBest Chile, friends and colleagues. Please allow me to begin by expressing my deepest regrets for not being able to join you today. I'm very sorry that I couldn't be there with all of you. Due to last-minute urgent matters, I need to stay here in Chile. However, this effort was not been in vain. Yesterday, we took a relevant step at the lower chamber of the Congress by approving the FinTech and Open Banking Bill, which we have announced on ChileDay 2019. For the last 10 years, ChileDay has brought together the largest number of agents, both from Chile and abroad, online and in person, to advance in the objective of turning Chile as a regional financial center and also as an important exporter of financial services, to diversify our economy and thus generate more opportunities for all of our citizens. We're facing challenging days. This new Omicron variant for the COVID-19 pandemic is a cause of concern and new uncertainty because, among others, it could be the start of new lockdowns and restriction policies. And for instance, this week it has caused losses in several global stock markets. However, there is always something to do, and the best protection against these variants or any other variant there is getting full vaccinated and take a strong action on as soon as possible. Regarding this special day, let me be clear and reassure you on the importance of our bilateral relationship with the United Kingdom, and especially in the financial field, which is what convened us together today. We have learned that international cooperation is vital these days, and it's cooperation which offers a great opportunity for our countries worldwide. This bilateral relationship is strong, and it has proved to be resilient and will continue to be, and that is why Chile was the first country to sign an agreement with the United Kingdom in order to continue our smooth bilateral trade. Now, we are looking forward to start the process for the modernization of that free trade agreement, which should today represent a priority for Chile, noting opportunity to accelerate bilateral trade, but in turn, new formulas to deepen the export of services and the digital economy. These being key areas in the bilateral relationship with the United Kingdom. Among these priorities, we also find the financial service sector, and we are confident that our teams will give their most and good outcome in the coming months on this process. Our aim, and one of the main objectives, is that our country remain as an important destination for foreign investment, and we continue to boost our economy and opportunity through our international role and economic integration. Chile has been the country of Latin America which accounts more deep and intense number of trade agreements in force. Our citizens have been benefited by this agreement, and we are confident that the concrete benefits and advantages of the free trade and multilateralism will continue to guide the path for the economic recovery of Chile and hopefully of the Latin American region. I would like to highlight that this Chile Day is special, now more than ever. First of all, the green finance agenda and the digitalization are main part of this event and a priority for the government of Chile, and that is why this is one of the most important long-term challenges for our countries. For instance, one of the milestones of this Chilean agenda was the creation of the Green Finance Public-Private Roundtable, led by the Ministry of Finance and composed by financial regulator, local financial industry, and the government. Also, the issuances of the FinTech bill that will promote a solid framework to supervise FinTech companies and promote open finance and digitalization, among others. As an example of our cooperation with the United Kingdom is the agreement we reached this year on a Memorandum of Understanding on Cooperation in Financial Sector Development, an MOU, between the Ministry of Finance of Chile and Her Majesty Treasury of the United Kingdom. This is a proof of our fruitful and reciprocal cooperation on financial sector development, promoting a joint initiative in the field of financial development through events and activities such as this event, meetings with financial actors, and fostering the cooperation of public entities such as financial sector regulator, among others. Also, allow me to highlight that this MOU has a strong green finance component that incorporates not only the public sector, but as well the private sector. I'm confident that we'll be able to sign this MOU during the first part of 2022, and I have asked my staff to work with Her Majesty Treasury in order to deliver and launch an efficient and concrete work plan starting in early 2022. We're satisfied about this MOU and its content and objective with a special focus on private sector cooperation with public agencies, since we know and we're convinced that working closely with our private sector is key to achieve an ambitious agenda between Chile and the UK. Last but not least, I would like to express my appreciation for the hard work done by InBest Chile, the Ministry of Finance of Chile, our embassy at London, and all the teams involved for organizing this ChileDay 2021. And especially, I would like to appreciate Lord Mayor Vincent Keaveny for hosting this event. Thank you, and best of the luck for the rest of the event.
Well, after those insightful words from Minister Rodrigo Cerda, I would like to introduce Mr. Jean-Marc Mercier. He's Managing Director and Vice Chairman of Capital Markets at HSBC. So, Jean-Marc, the floor is yours.
My Lord, Your Excellency, Governor, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome. My name is Jean-Marc Mercier. I'm Vice Chairman of Capital Markets at HSBC. It is an honor and pleasure for us at HSBC to act once again as a lead sponsor of this prestigious event, which celebrates today its 10th anniversary, as you know now, in London here. I would like to thank the Chilean Ministry of Finance and InBest, and certainly Jaime de la Barra, for giving us this opportunity. We are very pleased to be in the company of Vincent Keaveny, Lord Mayor of the City of London, and thank you for hosting this event. His Excellency David Gallagher, Ambassador of Chile to the United Kingdom, and Governor Marcel, the Governor of the Central Bank of Chile. To all of you who are with us today in London in person, and also to those who connected by the online event platform, welcome to ChileDay 2021. It's a pleasure to have you all again here. This edition is very special indeed. The world is hopefully emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic, despite the Omicron. And during that period, Chile has demonstrated its resilience and preparedness. Swift budgetary and monetary measures have kept the economy afloat. Vaccine rollout was conducted fast and effectively, and financial support was provided to a large part of the population in need. And congratulations to Governor Mario Marcel for his recognition by Light in Finance as the Governor of the Year in their global awards. Chile is set to grow at a record double-digit rate this year in 2021, and now faces the challenges and opportunities of a new post-pandemic world. Surging inflation and public deficits require prudent but decisive action from policymakers to be kept in check. Supply chain hiccups are disrupting global trade, causing worldwide supply-demand imbalances. Climate change has moved to the forefront of the global agenda with COP26, placing the race to net zero as a top priority for the public and private sectors. And last but not least, new technology and new technological behaviors have appeared during the pandemic and will outlast it. We're all gone digital. The digital revolution will transform our economies in ways that have not yet been experienced before. During the discussions on panels of this event today and tomorrow, we will touch on all these topics. We will talk about economic integration, international trade, fintech regulation, green hydrogen, and more. We will discuss how Chile's unique set of qualities can position the country to strive in this environment. HSBC's unique presence across key trade corridors and leadership in the ESG space puts us in a unique position to assist the country and the Chilean companies during this journey. And we are committed to bring together our people, ideas, and capital to help them successfully navigate our new world. So again, thank you for joining us today, and hopefully to see you tomorrow. And I would like now to welcome His Excellency David Gallagher to the stage. Thank you.
Well, I would like first to repeat other people's thanks to the Lord Mayor, who receives us in this wonderful building, in this wonderful space, which we came to before but couldn't come to for a long time because of COVID. And I would also like to thank the British Embassy in Santiago, the Foreign Office, the sponsors, everybody who's made this ChileDay possible, and above all, of course, InBest. I think it's going to be an exciting ChileDay, as Jaime de la Barra said. We have some really, really good panels, some online, some hybrid, some in the flesh. And they treat all the subjects which are at the vanguard of our concerns economically. Climate change looms large in all of them. As most of you know, we were in charge of COP25 for 2 years, and we've taken climate change very, very seriously in Chile. We also have a very, very good panel on green hydrogen, where in Chile, I think we're going to be world leaders. Certainly on a par with Western Australia, Saudi Arabia, North Africa. Fintech, open banking, all these panels are really going to be, I think, very, very stimulating. But it's my job today to introduce somebody very special. It's a very special honor for me to present the Right Honourable Jesse Norman, our next speaker. Jesse has been to Chile many times, and he's a very good friend of our country. For many of you here, he needs no introduction. but let me highlight some aspects of his career. Jesse, who's been an MP for Hereford and South Herefordshire since 2010, has held many important posts in government, including Minister of State for Transport, Paymaster General, Financial Secretary to the Treasury. Before being an MP, he was, inter alia, a senior fellow of the think tank Policy Exchange, a director of Barclays Bank, political editor of The Spectator. I could go on with examples of Jesse in various roles at the commanding heights of British life. But above all, he's the author of some seminal books. They include The Big Society, full of ideas of how to devolve power to civil society, which is still crying out for implementation all over the world, and his invaluable books on Edmund Burke and Adam Smith. Jesse Norman is a rare luxury, a political philosopher and deep thinker at the heart of politics. Jesse, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, David, very much indeed. No one can survive an introduction like that, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm enormously grateful to you, Ambassador, for your great kindness. I suspect this is the last time that you and I will be on a public stage together while you are Ambassador, David. And so if everyone will excuse me a measure of, as it were, due reciprocity, let me tell you that in David Gallagher, you have had an ambassador of astonishing quality and whom we have been honored to entertain and to learn from in this country. David is not just an ambassador, as you may know. He has been an academic at Oxford University. He has been a columnist, a banker, a businessman. He is a connoisseur of many different forms of arts and creativity, and it has been a delight to have him in this country for the last 4 years, and I can tell you he has served Chile better than anyone I could have imagined. So thank you very much indeed to David, and I hope you'll join me. Lord Mayor, ambassadors, governor, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me to give this address. My first visit to Chile, as David's mentioned some time ago now, I think in 2010, when I came over to take part in the Diálogos Bicentenarios, and it has been my great delight and pleasure to visit your astonishing country regularly thereafter, and astonishing not just for its beauty and its landscape and its resources, but for its history and its people. And I weep that COVID has prevented me from visiting in the last couple of years, a problem I intend to put right very shortly. As you know, our two countries, and the Lord Mayor was absolutely right to pick up the closeness of the ties today, but of course our two countries go back a little way further than that. In 1554, as I never tire of reminding my friends, England and Chile had the same head of state, Queen Anne, after her marriage to Prince Philip of Spain. That was 34 years before the Spanish Armada, and I'm delighted to say that our relations with Spain have improved somewhat since then, but our relationship with Chile remains strong, and if not strong, then stronger than I think perhaps ever before. And what a magnificent thing that is. And of course, as the Lord Mayor has hinted, huge scope for further development and cooperation. I think of all the techs, health tech, green tech, fintech, but so many other areas as well, and what opportunities they will present to our businesses and to our peoples. Now, these have been 2 years unlike any other. I think that needs no saying from me. I was at the Treasury for the whole period, and I had the extraordinary experience of having my wife, Kate Bingham, running the vaccine task force. So I was running the furlough schemes designed to keep people in their jobs and businesses afloat, and a bunch of other schemes from the Treasury. And in the other side of the house, in deepest, darkest rural Wales, was my wife running around managing the vaccine task force and getting it up and running from nothing. And I can tell you that it was an extraordinary period. I mean, we're in lockdown, we're not seeing anyone, we can barely go out of the house, and we spend, we're working around the clock, and it's very much, let's have a cup of tea by appointment, tomorrow afternoon, and those kinds of things. And at one point, someone said to me, "Oh, Jesse, I understand, I've got it." He said, "You're Mr. Tax and Mrs. Vax." And that seemed to be an adequate description of our experience. Now, David has mentioned my own background in trying to think about our history in Britain and also to use ideas from our past in a way that I think they should be used, in a Burkean way, that is to say, as part of the currency of our present political debate, as a resource, as a bank of ideas, a treasure trove on which we can draw to think and to illuminate the circumstances in which we find ourselves today. And I hope you won't mind, given the brilliance of any Chilean audience, if I do a little bit of rumination with you in this talk. We saw that the pandemic had huge health and economic effects. But it also had social effects. It had the stress of isolation, feelings of powerlessness. People were faced with a cost of living that was rising, even as they worried about their own futures and their own incomes. And this took place against a long-term background of the decline in traditional media in this country, the rise in social media, with all of the echo chambers that go with that, and the tendency that those social media have to fuel narratives of grievance and division and unfairness. And I couldn't help but think of a line in Adam Smith where he says, in the Theory of Moral Sentiments, man naturally desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely. That is to say, the fit object of love in other people's eyes. And what we see in social media is that extraordinary Smithian insight every day. So we see people competing with each other to look good in front of social media, virtue signaling. We see them punishing those who do not share their idea of virtue in order to reinforce their own sense of virtue. Microaggressions fueled by anonymity. We see a very Smithian idea. Smith believed that woman's greatest asset was his or her reputation. And what do we see today? The individual as a brand, building up capital in their own image, and in many cases seeking to monetize it. And what does that lead to? Tribalism. I think a growth of ideology through these echo chambers, envy, impatient demands for immediate action on issues that are complex and multifaceted, an endless tendency to rush to judgment, often without reflection or indeed knowledge. And of course, and we saw this most recently in horrific circumstances, an erosion of the traditional gap between the personal and the political. My dear friend, my corridor neighbour, on my first day in Parliament, David Amos, killed in his constituency, serving his constituents in the normal course of business. What a thought that a person might think that anything could be sufficiently motivating, any ideology, any grievance could be sufficiently motivating to go out and kill a man in cold blood. And behind this, I would suggest, there is an anxiety, a deep anxiety that reflects a need, a yearning for actual, not paraded, but actual virtue, and a worry that actually we do not possess that, and that therefore some gap has to be filled. Now, to put this in context, let's go back a little bit in time, and I have in mind to go back actually to the 14th and 15th centuries in Italy, and the Renaissance idea of civic republicanism. Now, what distinguished that was the thought that effective, successful leadership should and would and inevitably must spring from educated, virtuous, leaders and from virtuous citizens. Now, this thought was enormously influential for a long time, and through the humanist tradition in Britain, right up until the 17th and indeed the early 18th century. But in the 18th century, something extraordinary happened. A pivot, an intellectual pivot, took place. And it did so around the idea that there could be a science of man. There could be a way of thinking about human beings in all their activities, moral, political, economic, and other, that could be made into a science, that could be regularized and made subject to law-like explanation. That was a crucial Enlightenment project. It was pioneered by David Hume in his Treatise of Human Nature, and it was Hume who coined the phrase, subsequently picked up by John Adams, the great American founder, that what was needed was a government of laws, not of men. That is to say that it should not matter who the leaders actually were, what their personal characteristics or achievements might actually be, because a nation's constitution would do the job. A constitution was a machine, as they said in the early American Republic, that would go of itself. And this received its greatest exposition in the Federalist Papers, of course, James Madison, the idea of checks and balances that constrain different parts of the polity, set them in some sense in opposition, require debate, require discussion, and thereby enable, create spaces for human freedom. And that in turn in the 18th century received what one might call a romantic reaction through men such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, narratives of corruption and a return to nature. Now, if the 16th and 17th centuries showed in British life that ideas have consequences, the 18th century lesson was that feelings have consequences as well. Both ideas and feelings really matter. We can't, the thought now must go, merely think in terms of law and the machinery of politics or of government. The French Revolution was sparked by food shortages, by high taxes, drought, and reflected a history of weak government, autocratic monarchy, and centralization. But what acted as the catalyst was the ideology of change and ultimately of extremism and revolution, that France should sweep away the past and begin all over again, as Thomas Paine almost put it. And let us never forget, though the French never tell us this, let us never forget that the result was a disaster. Civil war, continental war, autocracy, empire, hundreds of thousands of deaths, and a political system that remained unstable for 150 years. I like that rather apocryphal story of the French diplomat giving the American senator a hard time about how badly the Constitution was functioning. And the senator turned to him and said, "Well, thank you very much indeed." He said, "We're on our first Constitution. How are you folks doing over there in France?" Which rather put him in his place. I want to suggest to you that this idea, this 18th century idea that feelings could somehow be captured and contained within politics, as it were, was normally pursued, that government could operate by itself like a machine, is showing its severe limitations all around the world today. Rather, I think we should say this rather unfashionable thing, that politics itself really relies on those that do have power doing the right thing and being seen to do it. Addressing people's concerns, meeting social evils head on, putting the public interest first, independently of personal gain. But equally, politics also relies on citizens as voters who themselves value and make clear that they value honesty, care, good judgment, as well as energy and flair. And Citizens as voters who insist on moderation, on respect, on courtesy from each other and from their politicians and political leaders. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the feedback loop that drives democracy. Now, today I am frank to confess my love for Chile, that marvelous country that you have. But your country is at both a political and a constitutional crossroads, I think it is fair to say. And I have detected, and I hope I am wrong about this, but I have detected a sense of ambiguity and uncertainty, and even perhaps fear. So much has been achieved over the last 30 years. Chile has been a beacon for prosperity, for democracy, for market-driven growth, not just across South America, but around the world. Poverty has fallen, inequality has been reduced, GDP has grown rapidly year after year. Of course, there have been serious, and there remain serious issues. Growth is slowing. There are matters of access to health and education and housing. Of course, that is understood. But the overall story remains an extraordinary one. Chile has been remarkable for the, above all, perhaps for the political consensus and stability that has made this growth, this economic, this social, this cultural growth possible. My worry, my fear, is that a small minority is now trying to put that at risk, to stoke reaction and, I should say, radicalism, perhaps even revolution, and somehow perhaps to bump or press the people of Chile into circumstances that might allow those things, through acts of terror, through populist appeals, through the utopian pretense that the world can be begun again anew, rather than through the hard work, the unremitting effort, the diligence, the care, the love needed to create genuine reforms and make them work. So I would say this to you and to anyone who's watching this: be moderate, but be vigorous in your moderation. Ignore the siren voices of radicalism, wherever they come from on the political spectrum. Protect what you have achieved. Protect the institutions, the balance of your government. And above all, honor all your people, not just those alive today, but the previous generations that worked to give you what you enjoy, what we all enjoy when we go to Chile, when we see its impact around the world. And honor those yet to be born who rely on you to sustain that inheritance for them in the years to come. And let Chile, let your marvelous country continue its extraordinary progress for another 30 years. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Mr. Norman, for that magnificent speech. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce Mr. Mario Marcel, Governor of the Central Bank of Chile. 2 months ago, Mr. Marcel was awarded as the best central bank governor in Latin America by Latin Finance, a recognition highlighting his exceptional work in leading Chile economy through the pandemic crisis. So, Mr. Marcel, the floor is yours.
Good morning to you all, and thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this 10th Chile Day in London. It's great to be here. It was not easy to get here, given that the day prior to my trip, the UK announced some new rules that we were uncertain how they would apply to my trip, but I managed to get through. So I'm very glad to be joining you and to thank all the organizers, especially people that have kept this activity going on over the years, and also to the ambassador for his hospitality, and I would very much endorse the previous words in the sense that that is a great luxury for us to have him as an ambassador of Chile to the UK. Such a wise observer of the Chilean society and economy, so it's great to have you here. And thank you to the local authorities. The Lord Mayor mentioned that he was 693rd in his job. I'm only the 31st, and I'm about to be the 32nd in a few weeks. So that speaks a lot of, some contrasts between the UK and Chile. But I think that we have all shared a number of challenges over the last few years, some of which I will summarize in this presentation. So I have the challenge of speaking both for ourselves and for the Ministry of Finance, even though we are an independent institution, but of course we are very much in charge of charting the macro policies, and we have been doing so at particularly challenging times. And the summary of that is that perhaps unlike other countries in the world that during the last couple of years have had to deal with one crisis, we have dealt with three, starting with the social crisis at the end of 2019, then following with the COVID crisis in the world that even if Chile was somehow exempt from the pandemic, all that happened elsewhere would have had a deep impact on Chile. And thirdly, of course, the impact of the crisis in the country itself, and especially the effect of the lockdowns and social distancing on economic activity. We face this with things that we have been accumulating over the years, the buffers that we accumulated. You may remember a few years ago that people wondered whether it was wise to save so much money in our sovereign wealth funds, or to carry out a rather conservative fiscal policy. And all of that proved particularly useful during the last 2 years. In addition to that, we have been able to draw from a very structured and well-articulated macro policy framework that allowed us to articulate responses to these three crises that went beyond some other emerging economies and perhaps a little closer to advanced economies, and combined with progress in vaccination, combined with the resilience in business and in households. Well, the economy is now back from that deep recession last year, and it's back with a vengeance in the sense that we are likely to grow this year probably at the upper end of the range that was provided by the central bank a few months ago. At that time, we said that Chile would grow between 10.5 and 11.5. Now it looks like we are moving perhaps a little closer to 12% this year. And I think, I'm not sure if it's in 1 hour or so, we will have our new monthly activity indicator that would again perhaps be on the upper side of expectations. Now, that was, of course, prompted by a very strong impulse to consumption. and therefore the recovery from the crisis has been very much tilted to the consumption side, to private consumption. It is expected to grow more than 18% this year, according to our latest projections that we will update in a few weeks with our next monetary policy report. And of course, that has put a lot of pressure on prices above what is happening elsewhere in the world. In Chile, we have these discussions on whether inflation is imported or not imported. Of course, there is a common phenomenon to many countries of the world that is not exactly the same as importing inflation. But above that, we have added to that a very strong dynamism of private consumption that has gone well above pre-pandemic levels, and therefore it is putting pressure on prices to the extent that in September we were already forecasting inflation at 5.7% at the end of the year. At that time, I got a phone call from a former governor of the central bank asking how we estimated this 5.7% because he couldn't get above 5%. And well, actually, we are now close to 6%, and with still 2 months to go in the year. So that gives you an idea of the dynamism or the pressure on prices that has been put by this in this juncture. But alongside this, and also as a result of the combination of policy measures that have been put in place, also we have had some weakening of the capitals market that for a long time played a very important role in the Chilean economy. The development of the capitals market, the deepest in Latin America, allowed Chile to develop a market for long-term funding for investment projects and so on in local currency. And that market, particularly pension funds, lost 20% of their value because of pension withdrawals. So that combined with uncertainty, combined with doubts on the direction of fiscal policy, generated a weakening or impacted on financial prices to the extent that long-term interest rates jumped by more than 300 basis points since the beginning of the year until our latest monetary policy meeting. After that, and after voting of the fourth withdrawal in the Senate, and after the elections, that tended to moderate, but still we are facing a capitals market that is more that faces a lot of tension, and that adds to a situation where the speed of recovery is not the only indicator of how we are doing, but also we have a number of other developments that generate some vulnerabilities in the Chilean economy that we need to face. Now, even if some of these developments in the capitals market are transitory, still the challenges for the next authorities will be pretty important, pretty significant. And now that we already have a new Congress elected that will take over in March, and soon we will have the runoff to the presidential election, I think that all those new authorities will have to face a reality that is particularly complex, not only in terms of facing difficulties, but also in terms of facing challenges on how to drive the economy forward after an event or a set of events that have altered the overall framework within which we have been working for several decades. So that's just going through some of the messages that we will get, so that allows me to go much faster over the next slides that illustrate some of these points. First of all, on the magnitude of and the development of this recession, The recession caused by COVID-19 has basically ended, given that per capita GDP is already above its pre-crisis level, either if you consider the first quarter of 2020, or if you consider the third quarter of 2019, we are already above that. And as you say, at the end of that, at the end of this chart, in order to reach the range of growth for the whole year, we need very little on the fourth quarter, even though we will see some positive figures for October already. Now, if we compare this with the prior crisis in Chile, this was the most abrupt, intense, but also the shortest crisis in living memory. By living memory, I would include myself, because this starts with the crisis of 82-83, at a time when I was finishing economics at the University of Chile. And we faced this very deep financial crisis that lasted very long, as you say in the purple line in the chart, that it took the country nearly 24 quarters to go back to where it started. While compared to the red line, which is our current developments, you can see that at the very start, the contraction of activity was deepest in any prior episode, but then it started to recover very soon. So already in the third quarter of 2020, we were already growing or recovering from that deep contraction. So compare either with 82, 83, or compare with the Asian crisis of 99 or the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9, we have recovered our pre-crisis GDP level much earlier than in any of those episodes. Compared to other countries, we have fared better, either by contracting less in 2020 or by recovering faster in 2021. That is shown in the chart on the right-hand side. So you see that the combining 2020 and 2021 puts us above a number of other countries, both advanced and emerging economies, only to be exceeded by China, given the much more limited shock in 2020 and a strong recovery in 2021. Now, these charts give you an idea of the shape of that recovery. So you see that the most dynamic components of domestic demand have been consumption of durable goods, followed by a consumption of non-durable and investment in machinery and equipment, with some other components of demand lagging behind. On the sector level, it is quite telling that the retail commerce sector was the one that suffered the deepest contraction at the beginning of the crisis, and then the strongest recovery, to the point where it is well above pre-crisis levels. I mean, it's nearly 120. It's nearly 28% above the pre-crisis level. So that gives you an idea of the impact of the strength in the expansion of consumption, fueled by government transfers and by pension fund withdrawals. In the case, but this recovery is still heterogeneous. Part of that heterogeneity lies with the labor market. The labor market has lagged behind economic activity, and of course has adjusted in many dimensions. It's not just unemployment, that of course it's still above pre-crisis levels, but the most important quantitatively component is the increase in the inactive population, that is people that left the labor market. And that is still not back to where it started. And by occupational category, you see that the contraction was pretty similar for formal workers as compared to the self-employed. Probably this is the first time that something like this happens in Chile, because usually the informal sector and self-employment operated as a shock absorber of what happened to formal employment. But given that the lockdowns kept informal workers at home very much like everyone else, so it couldn't function in that way. Recovery has been also shared by self-employment and formal workers. And actually, if instead of looking at surveys, we followed administrative data on contributions to Social Security, formal employment is already back to pre-crisis levels. Surveys tend to underestimate that a little. Carrying surveys during these times has not been an easy task anywhere, and Chile is not an exception to that. In terms of sectors, construction recovered strongly recently, same as services, and there are some sectors that were less affected, like mining. So there is some heterogeneity, and to elaborate a little further on participation, and the participation rate, you see in the chart on the left that the decline in participation was especially strong for women, that is the light blue line, and for workers above 55 years of age, that are the ones that have recovered the least alongside the younger workers. So that poses a question on whether participation will recover fully to pre-pandemic levels. This is something that is being discussed in many places, most notably in the US. And my guess is that, especially with older workers, there will be a share of that will not go back to paid employment. Basically because many older workers in Chile combine receiving a pension and working sometimes part-time. But once you are 1 year or 2 years out of the labor market, the loss of human capital that generates makes it very difficult to go back. And of course, there is people have aged by 2 years already. In the case of women, it's also a cause for concern, given that the cultural division of labor has made many women to stay at home because of the very long suspension of in-person classes at schools. That is perhaps one of the most worrying developments in the course of the COVID crisis in Chile. But going back to the aggregate figures, you may wonder why Chile fared better on the COVID-19 crisis in spite of starting from the prior social crisis. So we didn't start from a position of strength. Actually, we were still coping with the impact of the social crisis. And there are a number of factors: the evolution and control of the pandemic, the adaptation of companies and households, external conditions, local policies, monetary policy in particular, credit stimulus policies, fiscal policy, and pension saving withdrawals. And I will go through some of this to see what was the relative weight of all of those. So in the case of management of the pandemic, I think that was already a reference to this. Chile is very at the forefront of the vaccination process in the world, with 85% of the population fully protected with 2 doses or a single dose of the vaccines, and about half of those have already received a booster shot. So that means that we appear to be better prepared to face new waves of contagion, particularly in the case of the Delta variant. We are currently, it appears that we are already at the turning point, at a point where we are at a third of the peak that we reach in contagion in the first and second waves of the COVID crisis, and even lower on intensive care beds or deaths. So that's, of course, a very important strength that will serve us very well over the next few months or whatever long it takes to go through all this pandemic. Adaptation of firms was also interesting. We had many workers that moved into teleworking. Here you have two charts for larger companies and smaller companies, and you see that at the beginning of the crisis, let's say April, May 2020, about 75% of firms were already applying teleworking, but the proportion of workers that were doing so was far smaller. While in the case of smaller companies, it was about a little more than 30% of companies that weren't fully into teleworking, with all their workers operating that way. Of course, with the withdrawal of some of the restrictions, that has been going down, but still we have a large share of workers that are still operating under either full teleworking or under hybrid schemes. We are at the central bank, for instance, we have a hybrid scheme that covers about 60% of our workers. Of course, that is different by sectors. Teleworking is easier on finance than in manufacturing industry, but still the magnitude of teleworking and then the use of online sales as a way for commerce, or delivery, or strengthening the logistics industry was pretty much a part of this story. And that explains why economic activity started to recover already in July 2020. So only 3 months after the virus first struck the country, the economy was already starting to recover because of all this adjustment in companies, all the investment in digital means to work and so on. Now, in terms of the global environment, this has been a very special crisis in the sense that given that the pandemic affected all the countries more or less at the same time, and countries articulated very similar responses everywhere, both on the fiscal and monetary side, that created an environment where the local policies could have a larger, broader space to operate. I mean, if in normal times you were lowering your interest rate because the economy was getting weaker, well, probably you would get a response on the exchange rate side that would perhaps put some pressure on prices, and then there would be a limit to where you could go with an expansionary monetary policy. But when everyone is lowering the interest rate to its historical minimums, of course, that gives you much more room for maneuver. And that is what happened during this time, reflected in the chart on the left. Chile was also active in using its balance sheet to add further expansion to the economy through lending for credit schemes and from the purchase of some assets. We didn't do any of that at the time of the global financial crisis, like the US or the UK, but this time the scale compared to the size of the economy was pretty large. Actually, the balance sheet of the central bank more than doubled in a matter of a few months. And on the fiscal side, we also articulated a strong policy response that in 2021 was as large or even larger if you measure that in terms of the change in the structural balance, very much in the same shape that the US did. So that is, all of that is part of the environment of policy responses to the crisis around the world and how Chile fits into that. Now, we have kept ourselves very busy applying new measures to face this crisis, starting with the fourth quarter of 2019. At that point, the central bank lowered the interest rate, and right after that, we started a program of intervention in the FX market that lasted for a few months until January 2020. But when we were thinking on how to unravel all those measures, the COVID-19 crisis came, and we had to do a lot of new things. And as an independent central bank, we had the advantage that we could make decisions and implement them much faster than the government. So in March 2020, we're already lowering the interest rate to its technical minimum. Right after that, in April, May, we implemented the liquidity facility for banks that combined with government guarantees to foster lending to companies. Well, I will not go through the whole detail of this. If you go measure by measure, the central bank adopted more than 25 measures in a little more than 2 years, which kept us, of course, incredibly busy. Combined with these measures by the central bank and the government, on top of that, we had these pension fund withdrawals that were approved by Congress starting July 2020 on 3 dimensions. But once you have all these measures, one question is, of course, well, what difference it made for the economy and what may have been more important. And this is a summary of a study that we carried at the central bank that we updated for this occasion. And you see there that while the economy contracted 5.8% in 2020, if we had not adopted all these special measures, the economy would have contracted between 10 and 13% that year. So let's say we cut the impact of the crisis to less than half of what might have been if we had done nothing. In 2021, well, we measured this until the third quarter of the year. So during that time, GDP grew 11.7%. And without all these measures, we could have been still contracting by 0.4% or growing only 3.6%, so still far from recovering from the initial shock. Now, given that here we consider we carry out a counterfactual exercise with different dimensions of policy, you can assess what was more important. And the most important component of that was what we call here unconventional credit monetary policy. That is the combination of liquidity provided by the central bank, guarantees by the government, and regulatory forbearance by the Financial Markets Commission. That alone explained about 40% of the whole difference between the actual contraction and what might have happened. So nearly 40% of the containment of the impact of the crisis was due to this combination of this articulation of measures to keep credit flowing. And that is similar, even intensifies in 2021, and is joined by fiscal policy that became more effective, especially this year. You can compare that with the impact of pension fund withdrawals. They added 1.2% of GDP in 2020 and some 2.2% in 2021. And you may wonder why, because the scale of pension withdrawals was very high. But of course, not all pension withdrawals go into spending, and not all spending goes into domestic spending and activity. So there is a relationship of 1 to 3, more or less, in terms of the magnitude of the withdrawal and the actual impact on economic activity. And that is for the first withdrawal, and then it declined over time as pension withdrawals grew increasingly concentrated in the richest 20% of the population that has a lower propensity to consume out of this liquidity. So you see the evolution of corporate lending on the chart, in the chart on the right-hand side. So you see that compared to the Asian crisis and the global financial crisis, while in those two prior episodes, credit contracted immediately with the shock to activity, in this case, credit grew quite significantly. At some point last year, we had corporate credit growing by closer to 10%. And the interesting thing of this is that this was mostly concentrated in small and medium enterprises, because larger companies kept funding themselves from the capitals market, issuing bonds rather either in Chile or abroad, increasingly abroad. So basically, bank lending went to small and medium enterprises under very favorable conditions. Now, towards 2022 and 23, the economy is expected to slow down significantly after this major recovery in 2021. Our latest estimates are for growth between 1.5 and 2.5 next year, and between 1 and 2% in 2023. That doesn't mean that we will harm to the economy compared to our previous forecasts, because as you could see in the chart on the right, in terms of level of GDP, we converge at the end to something very similar to what we had before. But of course, when you are recovering from a deep recession, year-on-year rates of growth, are partly telling how you recovered and partly how you contracted before. So once things begin to normalize, of course, you are comparing yourselves with figures that are much stronger. Now, this chart gives you an idea of how these projections are distributed across demand components. There you have private consumption expected to grow 18% in 2021, while investment is expected to grow close to 16%. Exports have grown very little, especially because the mining industry has, the main mines have had a number of adjustments in terms of productivity and so on. Some non-mining components have recovered much faster, and imports have grown very, very fast to the extent that we moved from a surplus in the current account in the first half of the year to a deficit in the third quarter of the year. And that is likely to be part of the landscape as we move into the future, given that we have all major actors reducing their domestic savings. We have households reducing their domestic savings because of pension withdrawals. We have companies saving less, reflected in the recent decisions on the distribution of dividends. And you have the government using up part of the sovereign wealth funds and getting more indebted. So those three components of domestic savings is going down. So to sustain the same level of investment, you will need more foreign savings, that is a larger deficit in the current account. So we're likely to see more of this, perhaps not at the same scale, but moving into the future. Now, inflation, we know it's a concern everywhere, especially in the US, partly to a lower extent in the case of Europe, a bit more in the UK, because all countries have been affected by shortages or bottlenecks on the supply side, but also with demand concentrated on items that are also facing these shortages. That, for instance, is reflected in goods and services inflation, and you see the very similar movements in inflation among emerging and advanced economies. So when people think about inflation as something that is more worrying for one group of countries, I think it's a concern for everyone. And as I note here, this is not imported inflation. That means that what we mean here is that there is a common set of factors that are affecting in a similar way many economies at the same time. So that doesn't mean that it's something that we can wait until it's gone, but we may need to do something about it. And increasingly, there are central banks that are reacting to that, including the Federal Reserve, with a changing perspective on how long it would take for them to start the withdrawal of monetary impulse. Now, in the case of Chile, this is further enhanced by what has happening on the demand side, on the consumer side in particular. We have articulated a number of measures to boost household liquidity to the extent that government transfers combined with pension fund withdrawals add up to more than work revenues contracted in the course of the crisis. Now, how that is reflected in consumption depends very much on the propensity to consume for different segments of the population. So on the left, you have quintiles of in the income distribution, and you can see how IFE was distributed very evenly because only the richest 20% was supposed to be excluded. Pension fund withdrawals, in turn, are more concentrated on the richest quintiles. So all of that has been reflected in growing consumption out of each one of these sources of liquidity, either from IFE or from pension fund withdrawals. So as you could expect, the propensity to consume out of government transfers month by month is higher than for pension fund withdrawals, and they are stronger for inactive workers and compared to employed workers. So that gives you an idea of how this is distributed and how it is putting pressure on inflation. So we have here charted the evolution of headline and core inflation. Keep in mind that in Chile, the inflation target for the central bank is 3% within 2 years. And you see there that starting by the end of 2020, and even certainly even more in the last few months, there has been an acceleration of inflation that has driven us already for headline inflation close to 6%. Core inflation has not jumped so much because there is an important part of headline inflation that is explained by more volatile components of the CPI that we exclude from our core measure, particularly the cost of travel increased by, I think it was like 30 or 40% in the last CPI, the same with tourist packages and so on, but also foodstuffs and fuels have been growing faster than you would usually exempt from core inflation measures. But still, expectations are for inflation to accelerate over the next few months, and according to central bank estimates, they would continue well into the first half of next year. And this has prompted us to act on monetary policy. But before going into that, we did this decomposition of the difference of inflation in our latest monetary policy report compared to the prior one. And you see there with the light blue bars here that more than half of that difference in inflation, that is between 4.5% and 5.7%, more than half of that is explained by materialized higher consumption or expected higher consumption over the rest of the year, given the extension of government transfers. So it is true, there is supply-side inflation that was partly already recognized in our prior projections, the 4.4%. There is some additional impact of energy prices. Probably when we update this chart, we will have a little more of that, given that the oil prices have kept growing. But still, the vast majority of the additional inflation is coming from the demand side. And on financial markets, we see that Chilean financial assets have depreciated more than their peers as a consequence of idiosyncratic factors, and that is reflected on the FX market, on CDS spreads, on 10-year sovereign yields, MB spreads, the stock exchange, and so on. You will see there, I mean, there is a mixture of the advanced and emerging countries in these charts, and Chile is usually at some of the extremes of that. In depreciation of the domestic currency, pretty much at the extreme, only below Turkey. In terms of CDS spreads, also very, very high, closer to only exceeded by Colombia. 10-year sovereign yields, very similar to Brazil. And so on and so forth, and on the stock exchange with some of the largest declines in the last few months. But the important thing is, what are the driving forces of this? Because, yes, for an economy that is recovering, with the price of copper that has remained very high for historical standards, and for a dollar that sometimes has depreciated, we have had a rather unusual behavior of some of these prices. So you have here in these two charts the variation of the 10-year interest rate in Chilean pesos and the variation in the nominal exchange rate. And we have different periods. First, from the start of COVID-19 to the implementation of the first measures by the central bank in May 2020. Then from that point until the third pension fund withdrawal, then from the third pension fund withdrawal to the latest monetary policy meeting, and then from there onwards, including the effect of the rejection of the fourth withdrawal in the Senate and the recent elections. And there, in the case of the 10-year interest rates, the only one that I will go into the details given the time, but you see there that unlike the most complex parts of the COVID-19 crisis, where our long-term interest rate barely varied compared to historical standards, you see that from the third pension withdrawal to our latest monetary report, that increased by nearly 400 basis points. And of those 400 basis points, about a quarter is explained by the neutral risk rate, that is the expectation of the evolution of the policy rate. But the other 3/4 are explained basically by risk and uncertainty that is specific to the Chilean economy. That turned around after in the weeks after the latest monetary policy report that showed the central bank quite decisive in acting upon inflation, but also by the doubts on what would happen to the fourth pension withdrawal and the result of the elections. And then our long-term interest rate declined by more than 100 basis points. And most of that was the reversal movement in the term and risk premium. So that gives you a sense of how sensitive have been these prices to developments in the local economy. And that is something that will remain very relevant for the months to come. Now, this illustrates a similar point of how in more recent times this has tended to moderate, but still we still have to keep looking at how financial markets react, given that there are so many factors acting upon them. In the case of fiscal policy, we have an extremely expansionary fiscal policy in 2021, and we had our budget for 2022 just passed with a very important consolidation that basically assumes that the massive transfers to households will end with the end of the emergency of COVID-19. But still, we will need a number of years to fully consolidate the fiscal accounts given the huge deficits of 2020 and 2021. In the case of the central bank, we started withdrawing monetary policy impulse in July. Since then, we have increased the policy rate by 250 basis points, and we intend to converge towards the neutral rate by the end of the year in our next monetary policy meeting. And from that point on, we will see exactly how we will continue. But in these charts, you see compared the actual evolution of the monetary policy rate, market expectations, and markets are currently expecting that after reaching our neutral rate, we will continue raising the interest rate until inflation is fully under control. And the commitment of the central bank is very clear on that. Now, at this point, there are a number of risks and opportunities facing the Chilean economy. Of course, we speak a lot of risks, but perhaps a little less of opportunities. But I think that a balanced view should consider both. On the risk side, of course, we have the risk of a disorderly macro exit from the crisis and the unwinding of emergency measures. Part of that is also what may happen with fiscal convergence and new massive asset liquidations. We're also exposed to reversals in risk appetite due to changes in monetary policy stance in advanced economies, particularly if we see a substantial shift in the US that will affect many economies in the world and certainly would affect Chile as well. And if there is a high risk perception in Chile, of course, this positive behavior of credit may end, and we may face a credit contraction at the time when credit should be available for companies to expand. And on the opportunity side, we have a broader policy space than in other emerging economies. We have the chance of generating a new lasting social contract from a legitimized constitution as part of the constitutional process underway. We can intensify developments in the digital economy that sped up in the course of the pandemic, like in many other cases, but in the case of Chile, starting from a higher starting point. We have also the chance of drawing on environment-friendly global and local policies and new prospects for financial development. In my presentation, I had a number of indicators of this. I think that I will leave that for an after reading of the presentation, basically showing that Chile started for a rather good point in terms of digitalization of the economy, that creates a prospects of increasing productivity that overall has been decelerating for many years. So here we have an opportunity to overturn that, and how things accelerated in the course of the crisis through programming and transmission activities, information services, and so on. But our main constraint here is basically on the preparedness of our labor force to deal, to operate in the digital economy. And this is probably a very important challenge that new authorities may tackle. Of course, this is not central bank stuff, but of course, what happens to productivity in the country matters to us as well. And in the case of the greening economy, we have the chance of benefiting from the movement towards electromobility, given the demand that generates on Chilean commodities, copper, lithium, and so on. Specialists in this area say that this is a force that will probably compensate many other factors that may be weakening the price of copper. The transition in our energy matrix has been quite substantial. Today, wind and solar is becoming a growing part of our energy matrix and should be much more so as we move into the future. And there are a number of very important projects underway. We at the central bank did a study on the carbon footprint by activities. We use an input-output approach to measure that. And for instance, in the case of mining, that appears as the activity that generates more carbon. A large part of that is due to the source of energy that they intensively use. So as the country moves towards more sustainable sources of energy, the mining industry can also become less intensive in carbon emissions. And it is interesting that while at the same time we are a country that exports, for which most of our exports are based on natural resources, at the same time we're one of the countries that have made a stronger progress in environment protected areas, which is a development that is especially important in the last few years. So combining that, I think that Chile has a chance of benefiting from the greening of the world economy due to action elsewhere and due to action in Chile if we are decisive enough. Now, what can the central bank contribute to all this? Well, we have kept ourselves busy, not only dealing with the crisis, but also working on some forward-looking dimensions. So alongside applying measures to contain the crisis, we have been rebuilding policy space by accumulating reserves, for instance, something that we have been doing throughout most of this year. we are expanding our FX liquidity facilities. Last year, with the support of Congress, we passed this constitutional reform that allowed us to purchase government bonds in special circumstances to strengthen our ability to deal with financial instability. And we are about to start implementing the counter-cyclical capital buffer of the Basel III scheme. On the new constitution, we have done a number of special studies comparing arrangements in Chile with a number of other countries on issues like mandates of the central bank, procedures to remove board members, transparency. When we attended one of the commissions in the constitutional body 2 weeks ago, we brought with us a file with 10 documents for constituents to consider in looking into the central bank issues. And of course, we did our own presentation that we expect to have a follow-up on that in what remains of the constitutional process. On environment and economics, we started at home with ensuring that we recycled 100% of central bank notes that in the past we either burned or minced. Now they are fully recycled. But at the opposite scale, we joined NGFS, this network of central banks and the financial regulators for the greening of the financial markets, and we made a pledge in the context of COP26. And more recently, we integrated the Natural Capital Committee created by the Ministry of the Environment with the ambition of building accounts for natural capital in the country that would become an input into many decisions that governments and companies could make in the future, so as to be able to measure whether we are creating a productive capital somewhere, how far we are consuming nature capital on the other hand, so as to make wiser and better informed decisions, and this will be a very important innovation for us. On the digital economy, one of the subjects of this meeting, we are working on the regulation on compensation boards for retail payments, so to make all platforms for retail payments interoperable on a fast payment scheme. We are prepared to play our role in regulating stablecoins in the fintech law. We are working on the justification and requirements of a central bank digital currency for Chile, and next March we will publish a white paper with our conclusions on where to move on that particular dimension. And finally, on financial development, we have been implementing this new measure of bank liquidity, the NFSR, as a regulatory requirement. We are working with the Financial Markets Commission on the full implementation of Basel Capital that actually should start being applied by banks at the beginning of next year. We have been working on the modernization of our FX regulations to have a more efficient FX market and less concentrated, and on strengthening financial infrastructures, of which I hope that we will see something soon as a legal initiative. So we have kept ourselves very busy also on this forward-looking agenda. We intend to be a central bank that is able not only to adapt, but also to lead in certain cases, and the case of a digital central bank digital currency is a good example of that. And then, even though as a central bank, of course, we have a very little ability to operate or to do something about the structural changes in the economy, we are using all the powers we have within our mandate to help the country move forward and to take the opportunities that lie ahead, as well as to neutralize some of the risks that we are facing. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marcel, for your brilliant presentation. Well, the event today is getting to its end, so I would like to thank everyone who has made this 10th anniversary of ChileDay possible. Thanks to InBest Chile, thanks to the Ministry of Finance of Chile, thanks to the Chilean Embassy in the UK, thanks to the British Embassy in Santiago, thanks to ProChile's office in the UK, and of course to our main sponsor, HSBC. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, and I would like to invite you for tomorrow in this beautiful room to join us from 11 a.m. in the morning. So you can have a look at the program at invest.cl/ChileDay. And yes, thanks again for joining us today, and have an excellent rest of the day. Thanks.